I think as most of you know, I'm Kevin Sauer with Join Digital, and I really appreciate all of you being here. It's been quite a challenge to get us all together and get a different audience than we had last year. And I'm super excited because my 20 years of workplace strategy, this is probably the most exciting time of change, and a lot of the things that have been discussed, as you heard Ann talk about, this isn't new. It's been going on for 40 plus years, but we're now starting to see much more focus on workplace, on data, on trying to bring this all together. And I will, little spoiler alert, we do not have the answer, but no one does. So, however, I talked to global peers and everyone's looking for the same thing, just in different ways. But what we will share with you today is we'll start off with some data that'll give you some insights of what's being tracked, what's changing, and how those insights are leading to innovative companies starting to develop their experimentation and test out and try to stay ahead of the curve. So as we kind of go through the next wave of change, we have three and a half years of moving into this. It's going to take some time to kind of form new habits, figure out where this goes. So it's going to be a bit of a back and forth for a bit. So I want to introduce the panel here. We've got Randy Howder, who heads up consulting for Gensler and has been doing a lot of great work across the globe to kind of figure out how people feel about this in cross-section. We've got Kelly Dubisar, who is working with a lot of clients to develop these new spaces and experimentation, figure out what you're trying to do and how you measure them. We've got Alana Collins with Zoom. So, if you need to get the Zoom tips and things going, we've got an expert here. And then Danielle Newton as well. So we've got a little bit of data. We've also got a little bit of those in the ground that are really having to kind of be the mediator between employees, between leadership, and figure out how the built environment and technology really works for this. Just echoing a bit what you've heard from Dr. Sapersky, a lot going on. I just went out and took a quick poll of what's in the news this week. Lots going on, lots of changes. Even those companies that were fully moving in one direction suddenly are pivoting again, and a lot of reasons for that we'll discuss at the end of the day. A little bit of an eye chart, but want to kind of catch a couple of things. So as you're starting to hear, hybrid is here to stay. So we're trying to kind of move past that. What does that mean? How do we adapt to it? Technology is certainly springboard much forward. If you think about it, I'll pick on Zoom since you're on the stage, Alana. You heard about all the news stories early on in the pandemic of problems with Zoom and security, and they jumped on it and advanced the product tenfold in a very short amount of time. Now it's one of the premier products to be able to connect virtually. Mental health we've talked about a little bit. It is becoming a big issue, particularly in the workplace. You have disengagement and other things going on, and you have some companies who are embracing this, others are struggling a bit to figure out how that works. And performance measurement. The biggest issue we had pre-pandemic is we have managers that are managing by site. Something that's gone away. They need to really understand how to manage by objectives and by output. And so a lot of what Ann was talking about is you need to help train the business, work with the business to understand what are you trying to achieve, build that into the process, and that'll eventually get you to the answer you're looking for. With that, I will turn it over to the Gensler team.
Thanks a lot. So Randy Howder, I'm with Gensler. I lead our San Francisco office and our Northwest region, which is sort of Vancouver down to the Bay Area. As many of you know, we have a Gensler Research Institute. And so we've been doing a global workplace survey really since 2008. So I realize I'm probably the first person up here that doesn't have a PhD, so go easy on me. This is a global workplace survey that's given anonymously to thousands of people around the world. Within the US, it's about 2,000 people surveyed from a variety of companies. It's self-reported, so some of it needs to be taken with a grain of salt. It's one data point, and we're going to talk more in the panel about kind of how we implement this, what it's telling us. But it does give us some insights, especially since we've been doing this for so long. So I think what I want to share with you is how work and workplace are evolving from what this data is telling us. So we have two means to look at workplace performance. So one is effectiveness, which is our proprietary workplace performance index, which is a series of questions that maps measures of space effectiveness and functionality. And then we also have an experience index, which is sort of more how people feel that the space is working for them. So when we look across the global workplaces that we survey, 43% of them are performing well in this effectiveness and experience, but the majority of workplaces are not. They're either falling short in one or both of those measures. But what we see now post-pandemic is that people are spending a majority or a plurality of their time, 42% of the time working with others, whether that's in person or virtual, but still 35% of that time working alone. And across different industries, you see that profile of sort of from government and defense, sort of the most sort of working alone, to energy, sciences, not-for-profit. We heard a lot about the collaboration in life sciences being part of how they work. So this is just sort of a snapshot of how we measure this across industries. And as we've heard today, hybrid is here to stay, but, and I'm not just saying this because I work for Gensler, but the office is also here to stay. And what we've seen in terms of how the shift has happened, working alone, that percentage has been fairly consistent. Working with others in person has been fairly consistent for the past few years. That sort of blob is the scary COVID virus that separates the pre-COVID survey from post. And what we see, the big change there are those other work modes of learning and professional development and socializing, which I think came into focus during the pandemic when that was sort of the physical deprivation of that made people realize how important it was. So they're coming, just showing up at work increasingly for those things and recognizing those as a key part of their role. When you look at time spent by location, that also varies in a very similar profile to what we saw in terms of working alone versus working with others. So this is sort of at my company location on the left and at alternate locations on the right. So we see that includes home, third places, travel, etc. And so when we look across the US data set, our employees say they need to spend more time in the office to maximize their individual and team productivity. So that late 2022 survey data, the two colors, the teal is sort of all companies, the blue is top performing companies, and that's what we can compare with our data set. But when we asked all of the survey respondents, ideally, how much would you be in the office? They actually report more than they are coming to the office.
Just want to interject there, Randy. I mean, that's, to me, is one of the most important findings is that people actually do recognize the need to be in the office, but there's barriers, and we've talked about commute and other things like that. So that's one of the key areas. If we can remove some of those, then a lot of people want to come back more.
Exactly. And you see on the left is sort of what's happening now in terms of kind of days of the week mapped to what people actually would self-select if everything was in place to kind of maximize their own perception of productivity. And so when we look at sort of why do you want to come to the office, to focus on my work, which doesn't necessarily mean to do focused work. So there's a little bit of a distinction there. This is just sort of that separation between working from home and the blend of work and personal lives, that increasingly is important to people, followed by these other things on the list of sort of what would make you come to the office. And so that's a new finding in this data set. And then when we look at that focus, it is particularly important for the younger generations, which is a little bit counterintuitive, right? So they're in our own office, anecdotally, in San Francisco, a lot of our younger staff, they have roommates. It's not an ideal work environment working from their apartment in the Mission District. And so they're also looking for the mentorship and guidance and early career coaching. So we're finding that this data rings true in our own office. But there is a gap here between current office utilization and what employees say they need. So when we look at this, what's working, the workplace is effective for working with others in person and for learning and socializing. And when we look at that, 73% of can't read that. Working alone requires a high level of concentration, and that's still that 35% of the time that they spend What's not working is working with others virtually. So we haven't retooled our in-person environments to support that notion of sort of hybrid connectivity. And so that's coming out in this data. And then people have choice, but not the choices that they need. So again, we're not keeping up with or getting ahead of sort of where the puck is going. Choice is a powerful contributor to both space effectiveness and a great workplace experience. So again, in our top performing companies, most people report having a choice. And again, 88% of our survey respondents that are in the highest performing workplaces report that they have choice, and 81% of those report also having a great experience. So what those employees working in high performing workplaces report, what's working for them. They report having access to a wider variety of spaces within the office, so a much wider landscape of choice. So spaces for individual work that aren't just workstations, spaces for creative group work that aren't just conference rooms, spaces to reflect and restore, which aren't just quiet rooms, and spaces to connect and recharge, which are not just cafes. So when we look at what types of spaces have the greatest impact from those four categories, we see a little bit counterintuitive. It's not the gym, it's not the free snacks, it's having an innovation hub, having those quiet and tech-free zones, having a maker space, focus rooms, reflection and meditation space, and outdoor workplaces. Project team rooms, libraries, work cafes, rest and nap spaces. You see fitness area and kind of break room lounge are not at the top of our list. So it's just interesting when we look at what sort of spaces resonate with people coming back and meeting what they need to do. So I know I'm running through this really quickly. This is all in some form available on our website. You can download the full report, and I'm also happy to share it with you as an attendee here. But the conclusion: better designed workplaces drive better business performance. And the smiley face chart is kind of hard to read, but basically across all of these measures, and so there's categories of career advancement, personal health and well-being, relationships with colleagues. Those sort of teal percentages are from our high-performing workplaces where people feel that it's meeting or exceeding their expectations and they're having a great experience, that they also report all of these other benefits of their individual team and organizational outcomes. So, employees need the office to drive productivity. And so now I think for all of us, our task here is to drive the workplace to meet this moment. So we do have some pretty pictures that we have. Should it come up, we're going to describe them. Kelly's here. I think she's excellent at kind of taking this kind of information and working with clients to come up with actual design solutions. So we'll talk through those, and if something comes up in the conversation, we can flip to one of the images that we brought. So with that.
Yeah, and first off, we also want participation from the audience. So Josh, if you're willing to kind of shuttle mics around so we get some questions. But first off, we do have Alana and Danielle from kind of corporate real estate. Maybe we'll start off with Alana. I'd love to get your feedback on kind of what you see about the data. How does that resonate with what you're seeing internally? And kind of what's kind of your strategy to try to keep ahead of the curve?
Yeah, no, it's great data, and I think it's important to continue to ask the questions, not only internally but also with partners like Gensler and other companies that you're close with. I think networking is big, being at these kind of events, learning from others. You were saying I'm excited to learn from all of you as well, because each company is very different. So I think it's not only each company is different, what they need to support them in the office is different. What I think all the data is great, but again, I think it has to be super intentional. And I think that's not one size fits all. I think we've learned during the pandemic, when we're all remote, we were all able to successfully push our priorities through, understand we would all have a same seat at the table, as to where now we are in hybrid. And I think specifically for Zoom, we've tried some of these different space types. some worked, some did not. We didn't lean in enough on that, and I think we didn't lean in enough on soliciting and having those focus groups and really understanding the tools that each of the teams need. I also think that just putting a mandate or requirement on days in the office, it can't be that black and white. It has to be that they're going there to do this. They want to know the story, I feel like. They want to know how to use the space too. I think change management, education around these different space types, super important. Like when you use this, there should be a QR code. It should show this team is sitting here. This is what they have found effective. This is what, this other team uses. This is what they've found effective. And I also think the workspace reservation tools they are somewhat cumbersome. You have to understand how to use them, but it's going to help people choose where they want to work and also who they're going to sit next to, who you want to collaborate with that day. You want to know where your colleagues are. You want to know where a conference room that is, you have 300 between 10 floors. I'm only going in one day a week. I don't know where the heck that is. So I think it is important to do proof of concepts, which we have done, a couple of them, and it was immensely successful. We've really understood, as much as we empowered the world to be successful on our platform, we have to be hybrid because all of you are hybrid. And the experience for the person that is remote and not in the office is as important as sitting at a table. So I think we've learned just in the proof of concept that we found 40 bugs with our own tools, workspace reservations, with wayfinding, all of those things that we're selling to our customers. We would never have known that if we didn't have those anchor days in the office. So I think, Zoom has now discovered the world is going to be hybrid. So we have to drink our own champagne. We have to develop the tools to make you all successful, essentially. No. I like champagne. Sometimes people say dog food, and I'm like, no, that's not going to work. It really did. And it was, and I think being in corporate real estate, I was always really conservative. So I've been with Zoom for over 5 years. I was really conservative about taking on new real estate, and it really helped me quite a bit during that. But then the Zoom boom happened, and we hired 67% of our workforce was hired during the pandemic. Correct. And even folks that are near an office, when they were hired, they were given the opportunity to go remote, and they've chosen remote. Yeah. So it's, it's just, and I didn't take on new real estate, and I'm going to continue not to take on long-term deals. I'm going to continue to go back to like the early years where you enter into co-working or sublease space. There's a ton of it out there. But be very intentional about the space. If you have 50 people within 50 miles of an office, you don't need 50 workstations. I can tell you that. They weren't probably using them, to their full advantage. So I think, as Gensler was saying, you have to be very intentional. You have to provide useful different designs for different teams. And really have it be a destination and an easy one to get in and out of, because they're only staying from 10 to 3. That's it. Yeah.
Danielle, I see that resonates with you. So maybe if you can, I'd love to get a few words from you on this.
It definitely resonates with me. I think that the first point that you made, Alana, around really leaning into the employee feedback and getting a feedback loop going, I think is really, really important. And, each office, even within the same company, is going to be a little bit different, right? Who is working in that office? What are their needs in the space? When they go home after coming into the office on a particular day, do they feel like this was worth my time? This was worth putting on shoes and driving out here or sitting on the train, what have you, right? And so how are we, one, gathering that data? I thought it was super interesting what Randy said earlier about employees have choice, but it's not the choices they want/need, right? And I think that a lot of companies are experiencing that, and they're saying, gosh, we've got this space, we're spending X millions of dollars on real estate, and nobody's using it. So what does that mean? Why is that happening? And I think a lot of it has to do with not engaging the employees on what they need, not giving them an opportunity to tell you, this is what actually works for us. Third, when we are trying out these new spaces, when we're piloting new collab areas, how are we educating the employee base on this would be a great space to use for this, that would be a great space to use for that? Because I think left to their own devices, people go to what's comfortable. I sit at a desk, I go in a conference room. I don't know what all these open spaces are for. It's scary, right? And so I do think that there's an enablement and a change management piece that needs to happen.
And I think the managers, oh, sorry.
I just have a comment because I think part of the problem of getting the space right, when you ask the tenants and occupants the question, what do you want, is, as you're saying, they don't know.
Yeah.
And in fact, probably the biggest problem here is people don't know how the space makes them feel and what they're capable of doing. So there's a huge educational effort that could be made with the general population to understand how, from an environmental psych and from a built environment point of view, how it affects your body, how it affects your mind, how you will experience it, and then they can tell you what they need. Yeah. But there's a big gap between what should we build and what do people need.
And having them help design that, I mean, when we all make a pizza together, we're going to enjoy it a whole lot more together, right? So I feel like it's one of those things where you have to really just be very simplistic and lean into their opinions and go deeper on the focus groups.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you say that because, you know, I was reading something the other day and they were really talking about, I mean, I think something all of us in the room know is even prior to the pandemic, when we were all in the office, there were a lot of things about the office that didn't work, right? It was too noisy. There's a lack of psychological safety, on and on, right? And then we all go home and people say, oh, this is great because XYZ, but there's things missing in that space as well, right? There's a lack of connectedness. There's challenge for people getting up to speed if they're new hires or maybe they're early in career. And so there's gaps in all of these systems that we've had. And so I think that that remains in our current space. And I was reading something talking about really the psychological factors of the office and the idea that, for example, gray carpeting and rows of cubes is not conducive to creative thought, right? And so how do we create, you know, an innovation hub or a space where, you know, rather than going to a museum to get inspired, you're doing something within your current lease space that helps employees get into that space of innovation and into that place where you're thinking of something new, so.
Can I add just one quick thing, which is, we're not asking people what they don't want, and you just pointed out that they can say, I don't want this. And what that feeds into is one fruitful area of inquiry is, what are the things that frustrate you? What are the things that create your stress?
What are the pain points? Yeah.
Well, it's not just pain points, it's what are demotivators. Because they can tell you, you know, what those are, and if we can just start working on eliminating those, people would be more satisfied.
But you know, the truth on that is it's often management. And then you're the messenger and you're telling management that they suck. And that's tricky. I mean, I've done that. Because, I mean, psychological space is one thing, right? But psychological safety, you have to be able to speak up. You have to feel trust. It has nothing to do with the space. Well, it really doesn't. It's the culture of the company and it's the walking the talk. You get a good leader. I was so lucky with that Michelle Rohr because she was senior and she walked the talk. And everybody just watched her. So it became really intuitive. It shouldn't be that complicated. You know, I mean.
Yeah, I think you have to drill down into levels because I think each manager at different levels are more relatable to the people that are doing boots on the ground work. And you mentioned it earlier, like C-level executives, they're looking at what's the priority, what's the return on investment. They're really seeing they want to see the business impact. They want to see the end result. But the employees don't really have a say in that. And I think, yeah, workstations and rows of cubes and all those things, it's just not conducive anymore. Nobody wants to go and sit in them, I think, so.
talk about managers.
Josh, can you bring a mic back?
So comment on managers. And I know that, and you said managers suck. What I find is that managers are undertrained. And I think to reframe that comment, not necessarily to push back, I think managers don't know how to use office space effectively. And I think this is right. So I work with clients on manager training on how to use office space, including all of the spaces that were mentioned in the Gensler survey. And we talked about the Innovation Hub, all of this stuff. So it's not necessarily, you need to co-create, you need to have the focus groups and to have people, but you can't have all of your employees in the focus groups, right? You can't have all of them, you need to get their opinions, then you need to train the managers on, okay, here we have feedback, we are gonna make some changes, here's how you use this space with your team. So the managers need to be your messengers to the rest of the employees, is what I find in my own practice, that's what really works. If you just build it and hope they will come, that doesn't work. If you first get focus group results, then you build it, then you have some technology to measure performance, but you need to train the managers on how to use that space, then they will lead their teams into that space. So that's what I tend to find.
And not give them a change management guide like 24 hours before the announcement.
Yeah.
We've learned that. So, yeah.
Well, and I think what you're also speaking to is a value proposition, right? Helping the people that are using the space to understand how this works for them, why it works for them, and how to make it more effective for them and their team. Then the pieces start coming together, and you're able to skip over what, Anne referred to earlier as a, crappy communications cascade, right? It's like, oh, CEO said this. I see down here is kind of like, right. Right.
I think a big part of that is we're capturing data, but a lot of times we ask that from employees, but we don't feed that back to them to make sure it's correct. And particularly to our earlier conversation, you can't just get one data set. If you get qualitative without quantitative, you're missing some really key aspects. And it goes to your point of, it's not their job to know what they want, but we can start to ask the right questions, put the data together, test it out. And that's where we start to learn a lot more of what's working, what's not working. And I'd love to hear a little bit, Kelly, if you want to kind of talk about how some of your customers are using that data to kind of experiment, what they're doing, and kind of where the focus is right now.
Yeah, I think, like you mentioned earlier, this has been an amazing time for designing workplace. That's what I do. That's what I've always done. And I was just thinking about yesterday, I had a meeting with 3 different companies at 3 different scales. One was what you would call emerging, a couple hundred employees. One was several thousand, and one was a global behemoth that you all probably use every day. And the through line was this conversation around experimentation with all of them. And again, they have different scales, they have different expectations, they have different budgets. It means different things for them. So when we talk about how these solutions need to be unique for each company, that's incredibly important to understand. One size definitely does not fit all. The project you see on the screen is one that Randy and I worked on. We started it before the pandemic. It's for LinkedIn in Omaha, Nebraska, so you wouldn't necessarily think a super progressive place in the world. It's also where I'm from, so I can say that. But, it was ranked at the lowest in their entire portfolio by their employees. It had been neglected for years, and so they had decided to make a pretty significant investment. It's 2 buildings, 200,000 square feet, and we were partway through the design when the pandemic hit. And so LinkedIn took a step back and they asked us to reimagine what the future of work could be. They had committed to the site, the location, the people, so they knew they were going to build it. And I think, when we talk about the shift in amenities that are more purpose-driven, a huge employee base at the site is actually their trust and safety team. So they're looking at horrific content on the internet all day long. And so a lot of what we discovered through that is the need for these places where they could reset their brains and rest in between their breaks or in between, their kind of time off. And so 2 key amenity spaces that we developed was, a respite room where you could go in, control your environment, the lighting, the tactility of the walls, and there are several different versions of that, both kind of plant, organic based, and others that are really more mood lighting and sound based. And then the upper corner picture is our deep focus. And that was a new space that's different than a library. So when you think about extreme heads down work with no conversations, you're allowed to use technology, but there's kind of a social code when you go in there that you're not supposed to talk to people.
She's referencing the one in the.
Oh, no, yeah. It's the green and,
Oh,
yeah.
okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
No. But again, the idea that everybody resets their brains differently. Yeah, this is a slightly different thing. But that everybody resets their brains differently, and for us to be able to provide a spectrum that allows people to choose where they want to go and where they want to do that, light, dark, big, open, cocooned, and enclosed. We're also building something similar in our own office, so taking the lessons that we're learning and experimenting with our clients, and again, drinking champagne, not dog food.
I do like the champagne. It's way better than dog food or Kool-Aid. I think the thing that LinkedIn is doing, and where it's emerging, but this was designed and built like in the height of COVID, so nobody knew how things were going to play out. Obviously, the population in Omaha is different than the population in Silicon Valley, but it's a very sensor-rich environment, and they are collecting a ton of data, and it's informing future builds. So, to your point, Alana, it's not build it and they will come, but they are seeing where people come. And there are some key emerging trends of, Anne mentioned, a bar height work surface. Those are more popular in some of the spaces. And so we're learning things like that that's informing projects that are ongoing now, which I think is great.
Yeah, we got a question from Harold.
Thank you. I want to throw out another challenge, as if we don't have enough already. Adaptability of spaces. You mentioned there's the trust and safety team in this office. I've been at Microsoft 19 years, and I don't know how many times I moved, probably at least 25 times. So how do we design the spaces that can then also work for the next team that comes in? I'd love to get your thoughts on that.
It's a great question. So when we started this project, the assignment was that everybody had a workstation, so 1-to-1, and the scale of the buildings and the floor plates, between the two buildings, each one has 5 floors. And so in order to break that down, it was really important to create a neighborhood-based model, even when it was 1-to-1. We also had the task from the real estate team of building in buffers so that when we left, the teams wouldn't just destroy the space. And so this whole idea of the rail car, this kind of central node of shared community that was flanked by meeting rooms, again, to create an architecture and an entry point into the neighborhood was really critical to, again, allowing to keep these things distinct. What ended up happening is they switched to basically a free address model, again, still by team. And so we were allowed to loosen up the floor plans and the workstations. And so there's a lot more interesting layouts now with different scales of both height adjustable, communal tables, lounge space, tall tables at the perimeter, some cocooned spaces in there. And so everybody's allowed to choose where they go and sit. And they're also collecting data on that to see which teams are gravitating towards which kind of ecosystem parts and pieces within their neighborhood. And so within that footprint, we were able to allow a lot of flexibility in just how the furniture was organized. And that's an easy thing to change in a building. The hope was that we didn't have to change the architecture along with it as well. And so far we haven't had to. We kind of built in a model where if you went to a higher population based off of free address, when would the building become too unmanageable in terms of being able to reserve a room or being able to fulfill the kind of food and beverage needs of the group.
And furniture has become so agile now. Like, it is such a key part.
You don't necessarily have to build as many hard walls to delineate space types. I feel like it's really great how far, like if you guys don't go to NeoCon, you should. If not every year, every other year. It's actually fabulous to see all the different opportunities there where you don't actually have to build drywall and put in sound acoustics. You can do a lot of creative things that can keep it agile, I feel.
And Harold, another example I saw is a company that's watching the model of, Tuesday through Thursday or the high attending, what do you do with a building that's empty on the side? So what they've done is they've built kind of a tiered model of kind of social spaces and then different collaborative spaces, and then more of the heads down. And they actually open and close floors, solving two issues of, one, you keep the occupancy levels high so it feels vibrant and engaging based on the number of people coming in, and you also start to curate what happens on each day. So you're looking at trying to drive some sort of kind of new habits. So these are the days that we have the best spaces for collaboration or for social. So they're starting to kind of focus on those and create the best experience on certain days to see if they can actually get someone back into a habit that they can then expand on. Mm-hmm. Oh, there we go. In the back corner there, Josh.
I have a question for Alana and Danielle. Your position, your function is so important and becoming more important nowadays, and it's highly cross-functional because you talk to IT, data team, right, and probably technology groups, and you connect to human resources, employees, but then you also have to update the executives like CFOs on your proposal and recommendations and budget approval. So to your point earlier, they're going to look at this and be like, what's my ROI? Can you put a dollar sign on that? And many of these benefits that the proposal might bring are soft, right? They're qualitative other than quantitative. It's like when you have an Apple Watch, you get the insights from the watch, but it's hard to put a number on it. So how do you drive in this function today? How do you drive that conversation? How do you tell the story to make that flow, right?
I think it's been a journey the last couple of years, and one filled with anxiety in a lot of ways, because I think RTO, the term RTO, was automatically put on real estate to figure it out, like bring plans, what's the plan, how are we going to keep people safe? It was all of this. And still to this, I am now leading the future of distributed work strategy. Probably lives more with a people experience, but since we've been doing the work, and real estate was such a top of mind thing as a physicality, we've just been driving it. And I think what we've had to do is take them along on the journey that it's not about the return on investment. You can't price someone's happiness and their ability to connect with others and onboarding, ramping. We've had to really take them on the journey that we have to make the employee the priority. And if our core value is we care about our employees, we care about our community, our customers, we've had to really lean in and say it's not about the dollar at this point. What is the priority? These are the things that we need to do, and just continue to tell them we're going to continue to build POCs or POVs, or we're going to try this. We're actually trying a bunch of different things, but people experience doesn't necessarily know where to start either. So it can't be based around the real estate. It has to be a collaborative multi-work stream around the product, for change management, for real estate, for thought leadership. How are we going to tell this messaging, all these proof of concepts that we're doing? How are we going to tell the world that, so that, because they're looking at us to tell them what hybrid is. So I think it's been a huge cross-functional effort. My team has learned a ton. I have learned a ton, and I'll continue learning, but it's tough. It is. And we're no longer looking at spaces as that's taking that much real estate. We're no longer looking at utilization, because we know the utilization at this point. It's 80-20. 80% of people are remote, and unless we mandate it, we're not going to get that return on investment, and that we can't, and we're not going to mandate it. That's not going to create happy environments. So I think we've kind of had to throw that out the window and just start looking at what is the priority and what is the return on investment in investing in our people. Here.
Yep, it's coming.
Thank you. So while a lot has been talked about the sustainability and happiness, employee satisfaction, as you talked about, right? How much of it is the security of the data which we are regulating? And is there any kind of mandates for the real estate or workplaces, country-wise? Are we looking any kind of foundations or challenges while you're defining these strategies?
If I can, I'll jump into that because that was my past life of dealing with
Oh,
workplace analytics
Go
and
ahead.
on a global scale, a very large company. It's a very key issue, and it starts with really trying to look at what's the most kind of strict policy. So GDPR typically dictates, but then you also have, from a corporate perspective, what does HR and legal want to do, and then the one that kind of surprised me is what does PR want to do. And so we had badge data, we had great insights on that. We're trying to do sensors, and there was a concern that, well, they're camera-based sensors, despite all of the security reviews that were done, that just the fact there's a camera above someone, that got to the media, then that could cause uproar, so those had to go away. So there's a lot of layers in that, even though the data is telling some fantastic things. I love the examples of LinkedIn. They've got a fantastic team in real estate headed up by Kevin Alborn, looking at a lot of really deep data, sensors, attendance, surveys and things. And they also have the unique position of being LinkedIn and having the insights of what's happening with talent. What are they looking for? As Dr. Sapersky talked about, is a lot more people are looking for jobs with remote in them. So they have that, taking their own core business, taking that data, trying to put it in internally, and how do they internalize that, and how do they also share that with their customers?
And is there any country-wise, do you think that US is more linear than the Europe regarding compliance of these strategies?
Germany, France are some of the most difficult.
Okay.
And it's again, layers of this. GDPR governs, but then you also have works councils. And work councils, that is a relationship piece. I mean, there's some certain structure, but it's also a relationship of, if you have a good relationship with the work councils and they understand and see what you're doing, you have more leniency in what you can capture. But it's on a case-by-case basis. There's also technology things, sensors. So you have some sensors that are based on millimeter wave radar. That conflicts with the military in India, so that's banned there. Japan, you have to go through the ministry to actually get approval for devices to be used. It's a long process. So there's all these gaps of, you know what you might want, can you actually find a way to capture that data? And then, as we've talked about, it's the translation of understanding what are you asking, what data do you need, and what are the insights telling you, and does it mean something? And do you have that qualitative, quantitative mix?
US is definitely, like for our model, where we have so many locations internationally, and each location is different.
Each location is different,
Oh,
and that
100%.
has to be handled differently, because I'm just thinking of the technological advances, what we can do, but what we are allowed to do, there is a big difference in between. Yeah, thank you.
And part of it, I mean, Ann brought this up earlier, is we all have a phone in our pockets, and everyone knows that Google, all those others, have far more data than we'd ever want them to have. And it's a bit frightening how much is captured. And so it's trying to find that right balance. And unfortunately, a lot of this has gone under the microscope. And you look at anything under the microscope, you're going to find fault. But if you step back and say, what's the value add? What do we need to solve for? And what's the best way to get that? And can you tie in some additional use cases? So again, if you're looking at sensors we talked about, you can start to see heat maps, what people have preference for. But then you can expand that and say, well, gee, I want to know how the environment is working. I want to know if windows are open. I want to know where dogs are, so we can send cleaning crews in and get the hair up. It makes things much more efficient, back to a better employee experience. So trying to kind of parse that together and kind of get that ROI out to the executives, and then share that with employees as well.
Thank you. Thanks, Kevin.